The hidden truth in the Buddhist scriptures, impermanence, suffering, and non-self. Welcome back everyone to Mind Podcast. As you may know, we are gradually approaching the peak of the Dharma ending age. According to the predictions made by Shakyamuni Buddha 2,500 years ago, we can see that in this modern era, although many monks shave their heads and wear the saffron robe, they openly violate the precepts, act improperly, eat meat, drink alcohol, indulge in sexual misconduct, and lead a life of decadence. According to the Buddha, these are all false monks. We also see many teachings being preached by other religions but falsely claimed to be the words of the Buddha, leading people toward wrong views, misunderstandings of the Dharma, and causing those who follow them to stray from the path. So, how can we distinguish the true Dharma as taught by the Buddha? The only answer is to rely on the three Dharma seals, which are the three certifying principles: impermanence, suffering, and non-self. If a scripture aligns with these three elements, or helps people to see these three elements clearly, then it is a Buddhist scripture. Conversely, if it does not emphasize these three elements, then it is not a Buddhist scripture. Therefore, to understand Buddhism and to practice the true Dharma, the first thing we need to explore is the three Dharma seals. Don't take your eyes off the screen. Let's delve into this fascinating topic in today's video. To see more interesting videos, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. In ancient times, during the feudal era, when a king wanted to issue an order, he would write a decree and stamp it with a seal. This decree could replace the king's words, and the seal was equivalent to the king's signature. When the decree was read, people had to kneel and receive it with great respect, as if it represented the king's presence. Similarly, in Buddhism, the Buddha is called the king of the Dharma, and his words are the Dharma jewel. The three Dharma seals are like the seal of authenticity. Today, the Buddha is no longer with us, but his teachings still exist in the world. Therefore, any sutra that aligns with the three Dharma seals is considered a Dharma jewel, one of the three precious jewels of the Buddha. Thanks to the three Dharma seals, people studying the scriptures are not led astray or into the teachings of external false doctrines. In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha once asked the monks, "Monks, what is seen, heard, thought, sought, and perceived? Is it permanent or impermanent?" "It is impermanent, Blessed One." "What is impermanent? Is it suffering or happiness?" "It is suffering, Blessed One." "What is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change? Is it appropriate to regard it as this is mine, this is me, this is myself?" "No, Blessed One. This is non-self." Thus, impermanence, suffering, and non-self are the three certifying marks that establish the authenticity of Buddhist teachings. All teachings of Buddhism must bear these three marks. Due to this crucial nature, the three Dharma seals are frequently mentioned in most of the scriptures. The seal signifies authenticity. Dharma means the true teachings or the entire system of thought in the Buddhist teachings, recorded in the three baskets of scriptures. Dharma seal means the mark of the true teachings. The three Dharma seals, impermanence, suffering, and non-self, are the three marks of the true teachings. In the Agama Sutras, the Buddha sometimes taught about the four Dharma seals: impermanence, suffering, non-self, and nirvana. However, this is merely an extension of the three Dharma seals. As Venerable Tianxiao affirmed, nirvana is simply another name for non-self, for self-existence is samsara, and non-self is nirvana. The four Dharma seals are sometimes expressed as impermanence, suffering, non-self, and emptiness. Similarly, emptiness is just another way of understanding the conditioned nature of all things. Therefore, we can consider impermanence, suffering, and non-self as a general standard formula for the three Dharma seals. The first Dharma seal, or the first mark, is impermanence. Impermanence in Sanskrit is anicca, meaning change, transformation, and non-fixity. Any doctrine or teaching that does not bear this mark is not the Buddha's Dharma. According to Buddhism, all phenomena in the world are impermanent. In other words, impermanence means that things are not homogeneous or immutable. A mountain is an aggregate of causes and conditions. The human body is an aggregate of causes and conditions. A fallen leaf on the roadside is an aggregate of causes and conditions. And even a small particle of dust exists due to conditions. Therefore, the mountain, the human body, the leaf, the pebble, and the particle of dust are all constantly changing, never remaining the same, and are subject to the influence of impermanence. All phenomena in the world, from the macroscopic to the microscopic, such as atoms, protons, and neutrons, are in a constant state of flux and transformation. However, impermanence is not limited to the material world. It is also present in the world of the mind. In Buddhism, a person is composed of two elements: name, mental, and form, physical, or mind and matter. These two elements are always in a state of continuous change, like a flowing stream that never stops. In human life, all activities, psychological actions, sensations, perceptions, emotions, and thoughts exist in extremely short time frames, which Buddhism calls moments. However, the phenomenon of impermanence does not necessarily lead to suffering. In reality, if there were no impermanence, there would be no life and no development. If a grain of rice were permanent, it could never grow into a plant and produce more rice. If things were not impermanent, human evolution and civilization would not have occurred, and we would still be stuck in the Stone Age. And if there were no impermanence, we would never have the hope of eliminating the latent afflictions and desires within us. Therefore, the teaching of impermanence brings hope for all human creative efforts and development. Impermanence is the true characteristic of life. The second Dharma seal is suffering. Suffering, in Pali, is dukkha, meaning discomfort, unease, or affliction. In Chinese, suffering means bitterness, implying pain and suffering. In the sentient world, there are many bitter, sour, and acrid experiences that bring feelings of insecurity. The Buddha described human suffering as a burning and breaking of the entire world. The whole world is burning. The whole universe is submerged in smoke and fire. The whole universe is consumed by fire. The whole universe is trembling. Suffering is a universal truth, present in many diverse forms. The poet Nguyen described the suffering of the human world as, from the time of youth until the end of life, suffering and sorrow come many times. In Buddhism, the suffering in human life is sometimes described through 8 phenomena. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, being forced to live with those we dislike is suffering, being separated from loved ones is suffering, not getting what we want is suffering, and the very existence of the 5 aggregates is suffering. In later scriptures, suffering is categorized into 3 types: the suffering of change, and the suffering of conditionality. This perspective simplifies the understanding and helps us find the root of suffering. First, the suffering of suffering refers to unpleasant sensations. For example, the pain from a toothache is a suffering sensation. Being cold without warm clothing, causing the body to shiver, is a suffering sensation. Witnessing the death of a loved one is a suffering sensation. Being insulted or having one's reputation damaged, causing anger and embarrassment, is a suffering sensation. In general, all physical discomforts and psychological stress are suffering sensations. This is the first type of suffering. Second, the suffering of change refers to things that are not inherently suffering, but when they deteriorate, they lead to suffering. For example, when we are young, our bodies are healthy, but as we age, our bodies weaken. Our liver may be healthy now, but over time, it may weaken, get sick, and lose its ability to process cholesterol. The smile and radiant face we have today may fade, giving way to tears of sorrow tomorrow. Where there is creation, there is destruction. This idea can easily lead to a pessimistic outlook. Therefore, even things that are good now carry the seeds of suffering within them. In other words, the transformation from one state to another, the deterioration within the psychological and physical systems of humans, leads to unease, discomfort, and unrest in our thoughts and emotions. This is the suffering of change. Third, the suffering of conditionality. Conditionality refers to phenomena formed by dependent origination. In the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the Buddha emphasizes 2 sentences. All conditioned things are impermanent. They arise and cease. This means that all things formed by dependent origination are impermanent, belonging to the relative world, the world of birth and death, of samsara. The body, the external world, the 5 aggregates, our living conditions, and our psychological states, as mentioned before, are all dependent origination and thus subject to impermanence. Impermanence inevitably leads to suffering, so all conditioned things inherently contain the seeds of suffering, also known as the suffering of conditionality. The ways of presenting suffering in these categories are general. In reality, whenever afflictions arise, suffering is present, and only when our mind is free from the disturbance of afflictions is there peace. Therefore, impermanence is not necessarily the cause of all suffering in life. The cause of suffering lies in our perception and our positive or negative attitude towards life. Perception is about seeing and evaluating an event, while attitude refers to the proactive behavior and psychology of a person towards that event. Things always change, yet we mistakenly wish for them to remain the same forever. The suffering of a donkey or camel carrying a heavy load, the suffering of those caught in the cycle of rebirth, are not the real sufferings. True suffering lies in ignorance, not realizing the truth and not knowing the way forward. It is this misunderstanding of impermanence as permanence that gives rise to suffering. But why is suffering considered a Dharma seal of the true teachings? In one instance at the Tala Grove in Kambi, the Buddha taught the monks about why he proclaimed the Four Noble Truths. Monks, what have I taught you? I have taught you the truths about suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to the cessation of suffering. Why did I teach you these truths? Because they are truly beneficial and necessary for leading an ideal life, because they help you to abandon all pleasures, to free yourself from all attachments, to end all suffering, and to attain purity, enlightenment, and nirvana. Thus, suffering is a concise statement of the Four Noble Truths in the teachings of the three Dharma seals, and should be regarded as a constant issue in the reality of life and in the consciousness of Buddhist practitioners. We can only treat a disease when we are aware that we are sick. Similarly, liberation from suffering only becomes a reality when Buddhists are aware and experience suffering in their inner life. If we do not see the true nature of life and continue to nurture the illusion that life is happiness, being bound in an easy material existence, we can easily lose sight of our purpose in practice. Having the courage to face suffering and resolve it is the fundamental understanding. Just as a lotus is nourished by mud, the ideal of liberation is nourished by this fundamental understanding. The entire system of Buddhist philosophy also originates from this understanding. It can be affirmed that no Buddhist scripture fails to mention suffering and the path to liberation from it. Therefore, suffering is considered a mark of the true teachings. The third Dharma seal is non-self. Non-self is an especially important doctrine in Buddhism. This doctrine is the result of continuous examination of the principles of dependent origination and impermanence. Impermanence is the characteristic of change, while non-self is the characteristic of non-identity. When something changes due to causes and conditions, it no longer has a fixed identity, so it is non-self, or essentially, it has no separate self. For example, we say that a table is impermanent because we can see that it is changing, gradually decaying in form. But to say that the table is non-self requires us to see it from the perspective of dependent origination. In that view, the table is a collection of causes and conditions of wood and the effort of the carpenter. Many other philosophical systems have also touched on the idea of impermanence. For example, when Confucius stood on the riverbank and looked at the flowing water, he wrote, "It flows on like this, never ceasing day or night." Heraclitus also saw impermanence through the flowing river, but from a different angle. You cannot step into the same river twice. Western philosophy, in general, may have the concept of impermanence, but it seems to lack the concept of non-self in all things. Therefore, it can be said that the Buddha's doctrine of non-self is a revolutionary and profound teaching. In his second sermon at Deer Park, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, Discourse on the Characteristic of Non-Self, the Buddha taught the non-self nature of the five aggregates that make up a person. Monks, form is non-self. If form were self, it would not lead to suffering, and we could command it to be like this or like that. But because form is non-self, it leads to suffering, and we cannot command it to be like this or like that. The same applies to the other aggregates: feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. All five aggregates create a false notion of a self or a permanent being. This easily leads to attachment, clinging, and protection of the self and everything related to the five aggregates. However, All beings ourselves are constantly changing according to the process of dependent origination. The formation and decay of the form and even the nature of the five aggregates are the results of conditions, and the process of birth, aging, illness and death, or formation, existence, change, and decay is a universal truth for all beings and all things. On one occasion in Savatthi, the Buddha also taught the monks about the non-self nature of even a small object like a lump of cow dung. Monks, even a small self like this is not permanent, not eternal, not unchanging, not immune to decay, not lasting forever. If there were even a small self like this, monks, that was permanent, eternal, unchanging, not subject to decay, then the holy life to end suffering could not be taught. The lack of mindful consideration in our actions towards the non-self reality of all things often leads to afflictions of attachment, the immediate cause of suffering. The Dharma seal of non-self not only defines the authenticity of the true teachings, but is also a unique characteristic in Buddhist teachings. Due to its importance, non-self is considered the third Dharma seal in the three Dharma seals. The greatest concern for practitioners is how to find inner peace in life. All Buddhist practices are aimed at guiding practitioners beyond the veil of ignorance and craving, the roots of suffering. Ignorance and craving are the roots of all biased thinking and actions. When our attitude towards life is tainted by attachment, whether it is clinging to our opinions or being tied to a certain thought, suffering arises. The two ideas that humans are often drawn to and bound by are the ego or self and opinions, theories, or doctrines. In Buddhism, attachment to these two objects is called ego attachment and attachment to views. Ego attachment is the clinging to the idea that every being in life has a permanent essence or an eternal soul. On the other hand, attachment to views refers to the adherence to opinions and beliefs, thinking that they are always correct in every situation, with every person, in all circumstances. For example, in the Brahmanuta Sutra of the Vata school, a school in India during the Buddha's time, humans were considered to belong to a self, and that self was created by Brahma. Similar to the concept of a god or creator, these ideas and doctrines praising and advocating for the existence of an eternal, unchanging essence within each being seem to be present in most religions during the Buddha's time and continue to influence the spiritual life of humanity today. Because people do not understand the three Dharma seals, they often ask, if humans are always changing and impermanent, with no real self, who creates karma? Who receives the results? Or if there is no self, what is it that is reborn? In the Samyutta Nikaya, the Buddha taught the monks the method of contemplation on the true nature of the five aggregates based on the three Dharma seals. Monks, whether in the past, present, or future, whether within or outside of oneself, gross or subtle, superior or inferior, far or near, the five aggregates should be regarded with true understanding as follows. This is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. This teaching is the most complete and comprehensive answer to all doubts arising from the attachment and defense of the self. However, the concepts of impermanence, suffering, and non-self should be understood in the spirit of dependent origination in Buddhism, a teaching that encompasses all other teachings and lives within each person's mind. Therefore, in the reality of the phenomenal world, impermanence is also non-self when viewed from the perspective of time, and true suffering does not lie in the phenomena of birth and death of humans in the world, but depends greatly on the understanding of humans towards the impermanence and non-self nature of all things. Having the right understanding or right view of the psychological and physical activities of oneself is to clearly see the three Dharma seals of impermanence, suffering, and non-self of the aggregates. As long as human thoughts are still bound to ideas of permanence, eternal self, and wrong views, the three Dharma seals will continue to hold value and exist in the world. For Buddhists, the three Dharma seals are the three keys to unlock the door to liberation, the three contemplative methods to transform oneself, and impermanence, suffering, and non-self, as presented, are also the marks, principles, and standards for verifying and re-evaluating all theories, teachings, and practices in Buddhism. I hope that today's video will help you better understand the three Dharma seals and effectively apply them in your practice as well as in your daily life.